Hello, and thanks for your interest in the shifting demographics in the U.S. for which all of us, I think, need to plan. The Foundation for Student Success and its affiliates want to share some of their strategies and practices for bringing this really important topic to the awareness of their campuses and communities. I'm Sally Johnstone, and Sarah, could we go to the next slide? Thanks. I'm Sally Johnstone, Executive Director of the Foundation for Student Success, and joining me on this webinar today will be Shelley Reinhardt and Van Wigington from San Jacinto College in Texas, Quill Phillips from the Community College of Aurora in Colorado, Paul Dussault from the University of South Florida, and Teresita Sass from Southern Connecticut State University. Let me explain our format today. Each panelist will briefly tell their campus's story, including things they learned along the way. After all have spoken, we'll move into discussions for the second half of the webinar. While the panelists are telling their stories, please post any questions you'd like discussed. My colleagues, Sarah Torres-Lugo and Stacy Ziss, will be monitoring the questions and comments submitted in the Q&A area as we go. Now, to pose a question or a comment, click on the Q&A in the controls. And if you're in full screen mode, you may have to hover your mouse over the screen to make the controls visible. Once you click on Q&A, a window will appear. Type your question in the text field and click Send to submit your questions. If posing a question to a specific panelist, please be sure to begin the question with the name of that panelist or their institution. The chat box will not be monitored, so please use the Q&A feature. Let me give you a little bit of background on the Foundation for Student Success. It was founded in 2016 as the result of a sale of a nonprofit predictive analytics reporting project to a for-profit company. And the result of that was to create the Foundation for Student Success with a goal to increase the success or decrease equity gaps between Latino, Black, and American Indian students and others using data-affirmed practices. Now, the Foundation for Student Success first project, and Sarah, could we go to the next slide? Identified public colleges and universities whose success rates with our target populations were really much better than would have been expected based on input variables. Things like proportion of Pell eligibility, ACT, SAT scores, high school grades, and several other variables that the NCHEMS analysts developed. After interviews with campus leaders, 7 were selected as mentors. Each was then matched with 3 similar campuses whose leaders agreed to have their campuses be mentees. This map indicates which states have campuses now working with FSS. The darker states have mentor institutions. By the way, California and Florida each have 2. And the lighter colored ones have mentee institutions. We move to the next slide. For the last year, these 28 colleges and universities have worked together to shift their campus cultures to reduce equity gaps and increase overall student success. Now, as you know, there is no simple way to shift a culture. The lessons and strategies these campuses use are the basis of this and our upcoming webinars. Please visit the FSS website, which we'll show you periodically throughout this, for more information about the project, as well as case studies and other resources. Could we go to the next slide? Thanks. I'm sure many of you have seen this information before, but I think it's worth considering in light of campus planning. As the WICHE publication makes clear, we're looking at a future with declining numbers of high school graduates heading to college. We'll move to the next slide. Sarah, could you, thanks. There are, of course, regional variations, but if you look at this just in general, you'll notice that the pattern is still the same. So there's differences in the numbers, but the pattern of the sort of bump and decline are not dissimilar. We go to the next slide. Using the WICHE research, these are the states that can expect growth in the number of Black and/or Latino high school grads. And that growth is really not sufficient, however, to make up for the overall decline that you saw in the earlier slides. We go to the next slide. In comparing future grads, and if you just kind of look at this and take it in, to those who left high school in 2013, our colleagues at WICHE give us a snapshot at 3 points in time: 2020, 2025, and 2032. And these are broken down by demographics. The bars above the line represent increases, and those below the midline indicate declines. This should be a very stark reminder that we need to be sure all students are successful and there are no equity gaps. We changed the slide there. Now, changing the culture of a campus to assure student success takes time, but we have to get started. One very important lever of that change process is including all members of the campus community in the awareness and efforts in this direction. Each of our panelists and their campuses have taken somewhat different approaches to how they engaged and continue to engage their campus communities. I hope you will hear some new ideas to try, and you will also hear some approaches that maybe didn't work as well as they'd hoped. But let's go ahead and get started with San Jacinto College.
Good afternoon. My name is Van Wigington. I am the provost at San Jacinto College Central Campus. And I'm going to start off with a brief discussion about the college so you can kind of get an idea of who we are and where we are. San Jacinto College has been serving the citizens of East Harris County, Texas since 1961. We are a 2017 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence Rising Star Award recipient and an Achieving the Dream Leader College. We serve approximately 45,000 credit and non-credit students each semester, and they benefit from the system maps that create pathways for their success. Next slide, please. San Jacinto College is a Hispanic serving institution. The fall 2017 student characteristic, 56.9% Hispanic or Latino, 23.6% white or Caucasian, 10.1% Black or African American, and 5.6% Asian. This is a significant change in the population trends over the last 20 years. This is my 23rd year at the college, and I've seen basically the Hispanic, Latino, and white Caucasian populations switch in terms of majority-minority population. Our central campus is the oldest of three campuses that serves 3 independent school districts, including Pasadena ISD, which is 82.7% Hispanic, LaPorte ISD, 46.2% Hispanic, and Deer Park ISD, which is 54% Hispanic. As you can see from our ISD numbers, that trend will continue as our Hispanic or Latino population continues to grow. All 3 districts are above the 70% economically disadvantaged threshold. And approximately 78% of our students attend San Jacinto College part-time. Next slide, please. Our progress in student achievement is a product of the change in culture that began with our becoming a part of the Achieving the Dream team. And inclusion also in of student success in the vision, mission, and values of the college. And as Shelley will discuss, we've implemented a number of practices, including the Diversity and Inclusivity Council and the College Community Day. Next slide, please. Since joining the Achieving the Dream in 2006, San Jacinto College shifted its institutional focus from enrollment to a commitment to student success and completion that involves every employee. What drives the institution is not individual pursuits, but a collaborative emphasis on ensuring success for all students who enter the college, no matter the pathway they use or the level of skills with which they arrive. I can remember when I first started at the college, the only number that we really cared about was what was our enrollment number for that semester. That has shifted completely as we now move more into predictive analytics, trying to figure out what we can do to help our students be successful and eliminate those barriers that might impact their success. Next slide, please. Student success goals are stated in the Central Tennessee College mission statement, where we provide for seamless transitions from the front door to completion, equity among diverse populations, student achievement of goals, redefining of student expectations, and encouragement of student exploration of new opportunities. Student success is also one of the 5 college strategic goals: student success, workforce and economic development, the P16 pipeline, our people, and continuous improvement. From the strategic goals, annual priorities are developed. For student success, these include positioning for the future, front door to completion, anticipation of and response to workforce needs, talent and organizational development, and fiscal accountability and responsibility. Shelley will now discuss some of the initiatives and programs that we implemented to help achieve these goals.
Thank you, Van. My name is Shelley Reinhardt. I'm the Dean of Student Development at Central Campus. Next slide, please. So in 2009, we were chartered with the Diversity and Inclusivity Council. And excuse me, since this was one of our core values, we felt it important to bring together a cross-departmental representation so that we could start having those conversations about what diversity and inclusivity meant to us as a college, and also to provide strong leadership as a recommending body to our chancellor. So we really began looking at some data about our student demographics, how they've changed, as Van mentioned, over the years, and how our staff, faculty, administrator demographics were reflected in that change. At the time when we first came together, we started reviewing our EEOC statements, our vision, making sure that everything reflected how we felt about diversity and inclusivity. We also looked at our hiring practices and established some recruiting resources for hiring managers, as well as hiring guidelines on the selection committees, who all would be on those selection committees, as well as some guidelines that would help our hiring managers in making sure that we had diverse hiring practices. The Diversity and Inclusivity Council does still meet today. They're reviewing practices continuously to make sure that we're reviewing them from a diversity lens. They also created something called the intercultural modules, and this was a professional development opportunity for all of our staff here at Sandusky College. And so each of those modules our staff are required to go through, and it really is all about developing cultural self-awareness and intercultural curiosity. Next slide, please. So as Sally mentioned, engagement college-wide or institution-wide is very important. So something else that we began doing in 2009 was College Community Day. This is an opportunity for all 3 campuses to come together and to have conversations. So there are no classes that day. It is built into the curriculum, and so we have no students on campus. The whole college community comes together so that we can engage and have conversations about diversity, about student success, about our values, our direction. This includes all areas within the college. So that means instruction, student services, our support staff, our maintenance crew, our police department, everyone comes together. There is a schedule that all employees will attend a session with the chancellor, as well as a breakout session to choose from, or several breakout sessions to choose from. So an example, this last College Community Day in February, we had the Chancellor's Cafe, in which everyone went through table topics. And so we had equity, different populations, student success, engagement, and continuous improvement as topics. And each table talked about what's working and what we can do better. There now is a review council that we are reviewing all the notes and synthesizing in themes and making recommendations on solutions to our chancellor. Next slide, please. So all aspects of the college are really moving in one direction and are building around the student's Sand-Jack journey from front door to completion. And so as you can see on this slide, our increase over the last 10 years in our credentials awarded, that's both degrees and certificates, have made significant improvements, and we're extraordinarily proud of where we have come in just a few short years. Next slide, please. So as we're looking at from an equity perspective, and Sally shared some data at the beginning of this presentation, we also have been looking at our credentials awarded and our head count. Yes. And so as you can see, as we have, especially with our Hispanic population growth, we are also mirroring those credentials awarded. And so we are paying very close attention to that. So all of these practices that we've done at San Jacinto College has really contributed to this culture change. And we have a very specific direction and focus for a unified perspective. So we're still continuing on that student experience. Our vision really is that a student would never fail because of a barrier we have overlooked. And we have bold leadership that allows us to have continuous improvement and to really have the courage to make some changes and ask some hard questions. Back to you, Sally.
All right. Thank you very much, Shelley and Van. And I want to remind our audience to be sure to post any questions you have for either Shelley or Van during our discussion section. Let's move on now to the story of engaging the campus community at the Community College of Aurora.
Thank you, Sally. I'm so happy to be here with you all. As Sally said, my name is Quill Phillips, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. And I am the Special Assistant to the President for Inclusive Excellence at the Community College of Aurora. Next slide, please. Today I'm going to cover a quick review about CCA and some of our student and employee demographics, but we'll mostly be talking about how we have shifted the culture of our campus with using an inclusive excellence framework and equity mindset. So I'll go over some of those items, and then we'll talk about getting the buy-in from leadership and the foundation that we've laid here. Next slide, please. So the Community College of Aurora is situated in Aurora, Colorado, a large suburb of Denver of over about 360,000 people that live in Aurora. We are the second largest city in Colorado and is one of 13 colleges in the Colorado Community College system. Aurora is also a really diverse city with about 28% of our population who identify as a Hispanic or Latinx, 15.8% identify as Black, 5.3% of Aurora residents identify as Asian, 0.8% identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, and 0.3% identify as Pacific Islander, with 63% of Aurora residents that identify as white, and 5.8% who identify as two or more races. CCA population similarly reflects the Aurora resident population, and CCA is just over 11,000 students that we have by head count enrolled, and about a third of those students are concurrently enrolled students, and 80% of our whole student body is also enrolled part-time, which is not unusual for a community college. CCA's racial demographic population has also grown over the last 5 years or so to be a more racially diverse population, with 31% of our students who identify as Latinx, 20% that identify as Black, 9% as Asian and Pacific Islander, 2% of our students who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, and 32% who identify as white. So also CCA has been recently designated as a Hispanic serving institution in 2017. Though our student demographics demonstrate the growth of racially diverse students enrolling, we have identified equity gaps between our students of color and white students, which is about a 5% completion gap and 3% transfer gap. So that this is a very important reason for us to be a part and on continuing on our equity journey. Next slide, please. Our CCA employee demographics look a little bit different from our students. Of 560 employees, 10% identify as Hispanic or Latinx, 9.6% identify as Black, 3.8% identify as Asian American, 0.2% identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, identify with 2 or more races, and 73.8% identify as white. So it's very, very different from our student demographics that I just covered. It's important that our employees reflect our student body, and it's currently a college-wide strategic goal to diversify our workforce, along with the system goal, our Colorado Community College system goal, to do the same as well. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, and thinking about some of our data, we have done a lot of work in trying to create a sustainable structure of what it means when we talk about inclusive excellence and equity on our campus. So in 2013, we embarked on a journey with the Center for Urban Education with the University of Southern California. And our math department has was really the main department that sort of piloted the equity scorecard. And that allowed our math department to be able to look at their data, their student success data, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender, around which students were succeeding and matriculating on to courses, as well as disparities that we saw in developmental math and education. And they were able to look at strategies and practices that they learned to begin to close those gaps. And that also included hiring practices of full-time faculty as well as adjunct instructors. That work has been able to be really successful with our math department in seeing those gaps close, essentially, and also increasing the diversity of the math faculty that are in the math department. Our CCA leadership team was really dedicated to being able to sustain that work with the Center for Urban Education. And out of that work, actually my job was created, and I was the first person to fulfill this position. And the council, and developing the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council, which is now called the Inclusive Excellence Council, was also created in 2014 to help expand not only some of the Center for Urban Education work, but more so college-wide and institutionalizing inclusive excellence. So with that, there were multiple committees that were created from this council. This council is made up of CCA employees college-wide that volunteer their time, in addition to their full-time roles, to work on our committees that cover anything from human resources to programming, assessment and how we're assessing what we're doing, but mostly also our campus climate assessment, which I'll speak about in just a second. And so that is where really the bulk of this work gets done. In 2015 and 16 academic year, we mandated a lot of trainings. And the first mandate was for our full-time faculty training that occurred. And so we talked about sort of culturally relevant teaching and inclusive pedagogy, and that was more internal, and we have now grown that and identified multiple external trainers who are really experts in the field of critical pedagogy, critical race theory, and training our faculty and what that means for the classroom and strategies to apply. So those are offered 4 times a year. We also require our full-time faculty to participate and also open it up to our adjunct instructors, which we have seen about a 70% growth in adjunct instructor participation just this year as well. Also, what happened in 2015 and 16 was the expansion of the Center for Urban Education work with the Equity and Instruction Leadership Academy, or we call it ELA, ELA. And so with ELA, it is a cohort model where we take faculty members, full-time faculty members, about 6 folks at a time each semester, and we take them through all of the Center for Urban Education protocol. That includes reviewing their syllabi, classroom observations, deconstructing classroom tasks. They are able to look at their data, and usually it's data from a gateway course, and they choose the class that has the widest gaps. And they really are focusing on that course during that semester's time. They also are able to deconstruct their classroom culture and also examine their own socialization and implicit biases that may impact and impede on the student learning process. And so they're able to also own a lot of what happens in the classroom and what happens with student success. And so with that, we have seen a lot of growth from our faculty members who are really dedicated in taking this work beyond their involvement with the Academy and have been able to see some gaps close in other courses such as psychology as well. So the Academy is up and running, is a great program, and we will be able to extend that to our some adjunct instructors next semester from a grant we received from the Colorado Department of Higher Education. Next, our climate survey was also an initiative that we did that measured values, attitudes, beliefs for our faculty, staff, and students around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we really use that to inform everything that we have done up until this point. Our Inclusive Excellence campaign also came out of this first year, really implementing our council, and I can talk about that now. Next slide, please. So what we did with our campaign is we had about 8 different pictures, as you may see on the screen, all around both of our campuses. And we left these up for, I think, about 2 weeks. And we were able to really talk about what does it mean to embed inclusive excellence on campus. And we actually showed students the data and asked for their feedback on what it is that they think we should do in taking responsibility for their success, which has also informed our strategic plan. Next slide, please. So currently we have an Inclusive Excellence strategic plan, which is well underway, that will allow us to be able to continue to measure our success, looking at our human resource goals. We currently have a required implicit bias training for hiring committees. Our Inclusive Excellence statement is in every job description, and we also have Inclusive Excellence criteria for employee awards that we create, as well as student programming to begin to get more students engaged and involved in this work. And so if you would like to know more about what we've been able to do, you can check out a chapter that myself and some colleagues wrote called Engaging Inclusive Excellence. There is the reference site here on the screen, Creating a College with an Equity Mindset in the Cultural Awareness and Competency Development in Higher Education book. Back to you, Sally.
All right. Thank you very much, Quill. Again, to the audience, please go ahead and post any questions you have for her or about the journey at the Community College of Aurora. Now we'll move to the University of South Florida and their campus engagement that has resulted in major reductions in equity gaps and improvements in overall student success. So on to you, Paul.
Thank you, Sally. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. I have the pleasure to serve the University of South Florida as the Vice President for Student Affairs and Student Success, a university located in Tampa, Florida. We have 43,000 students, and about 31,000 of them are undergraduates, and a majority of those identify as non-white. And it's also important to note about 40% of our undergraduate students are Pell Grant recipients. And as you'll see in the results, I have a set of slides to focus your attention on the results we've achieved since roughly 2010, when the Student Success Task Force produced a lengthy report that has served as our blueprint for our student success movement. Next slide, please. So you'll see in 2009, the president and the provost created a university-wide task force with 100 members, divided into 8 work groups. And I chaired that task force and initially thought that we had far too many people on it. But now, looking back on it, I'm grateful that the university set up a task force with university-wide representation, because the president and provost already knew that everybody on campus, every unit, every person, had a role to play in our student success initiative. And that explains why the task force was so large. But it began the process of changing the institutional culture and producing the performance improvements that we had long craved. I should point out that the university went through what we would call 2 previous false starts, in that a couple of task forces did not really produce results. They were short-lived and they didn't see tangible results. something changed with the task force that produced its report in April 2010. And the task force recommended 3 fundamental reforms, which I think explain the results you see here. 1, to make institutional commitment to student success, that is, make it a permanent priority of the university. 2, to integrate student success into the institutional culture of USF. And 3, build our research capacity. And we've been focused on those 3 things ever since. And so, for example, after that report came out, I was appointed first the Vice Provost for Student Success. We created a university-wide Student Success Council. And the President committed $3 million in non-recurring funds to support the recommendations of the task force. So that you'll see then, since that time, our 6-year graduation rates have improved significantly, reaching a high of 71% 6-year grad rate with the 2011 cohort, and we are expecting our improvements to continue. We're even prouder of what you'll see on the next slide, showing the 6-year graduation rate by race and ethnicity, so that along the way we have eliminated the achievement gap by race and ethnicity. Beginning probably with the 2014-15 year, Black and Hispanic students began to outpace white students, and that has been the case ever since. And in the last cohort, the gap has grown even wider, with Black students graduating at 73.9 compared to 67.7% grad rate for white students. Now, to explain this, we first emphasized that our movement was based on the firm belief that every one of our students will succeed when given the opportunity to do so. That has become our motto, and we have enacted this. And the results are showing us that we have pursued our student success objectives on the right foundation. We have a few of the programs that generally are used to promote minority student success. Some are bridge programs, mentoring programs, but those programs don't serve enough students to explain the results you see there. We set out to elevate the performance of all of our students, and all of our students have risen to our expectations. And so when asked what accounts for the improvement, we might occasionally look toward other initiatives that may not have been designed specifically to help minority students, but have produced results. So, for example, redesigning mathematics gateway courses. We've done that, as I'm sure many institutions have done, and the passing rates in those courses have improved, and it turns out those have also improved the passing rates for our minority students. And so that has had a great impact on the performance of our underrepresented minority students. You'll also see in the next slide that we have achieved near parity in outcomes when we look at graduation rates by income. And here we use Pell versus non-Pell recipient students as a proxy for income. And the university monitors these rates carefully because we believe firmly in the equity in outcomes, not just access. We want all of our students to achieve at the same rate. So we're proud to have eliminated the achievement gap, and at near parity on income, we do have gaps. And I suspect many other institutions across the country share the same gender gap that we are now trying to understand and fix. That is, male undergraduate students are performing or graduating at rates 7 to 10 points behind women. And this is a phenomenon we know that's going on across the country, but it's here and it's difficult to understand and fix. But we believe we're on the right track to understanding and fixing that. We've adopted and implemented a number of different initiatives to promote student success. We formed a persistence committee to focus attention on the performance of all students. using predictive analytics to identify those students struggling and who could benefit from timely interventions by the right person at the right time. But I should also add that doing these things also requires us to make sure that those students coming in with financial need receive the assistance they need. Many of our students, of course, coming in with financial needs find themselves challenged to enroll in 15 credit hours and be on a pace to graduate in 4 years. So providing them with financial aid is critical, and so we've adjusted our financial aid practices to give highest priority to our high-need, high-ability students who would benefit from this assistance, and that's a part of the explanation for the successes we've had here. But I also think it's part of a university-wide movement that has focused on changing institutional culture. I can't say, Sally, that we've changed that culture and our work is not yet done, but I certainly think we're on the right track. Back to you, Sally.
All right, Paul, thank you very much. And thanks for adding in some things that you thought would work but didn't. Now, again, please post any questions you may have, either for Paul or for other panelists. But our final story comes from Southern Connecticut State University. Teresita?
Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everyone. Next slide. Southern Connecticut State University is a public comprehensive university in New Haven, nearly a stone's throw from Yale. We serve over 10,000 primarily undergraduate commuter students from within Connecticut. To provide some context and a little bit of framework and to add to what Sally talked about, the region is experiencing major demographic shifts and declines. 1 in 3 of New Haven residents identify as minority, compared to 1 in 5 in 1990. The Greater New Haven MSA is 69% minority, with African Americans comprising 33% and Hispanics a close 28%. It should also be noted that there has been a major increase in the last 5 years of residents who are also foreign born. That increase is 17%. And New Haven is among only a few areas of very small growth within the state of Connecticut. As recently as 2011, approximately 25% of Southern students were non-white, but in 7 years that has grown to nearly 40%. However, faculty of color have not kept pace with a representation of less than 20%. Though some efforts have been made in recent years, we agree that we must do better. This and other factors provided an imperative not only to examine these data, but intentionally and more proactively address these discrepancies. Next slide, please. The shrinking percentage of white incoming freshmen, the top gray bar, and the increasing numbers of minority groups are not an anomaly or the result of a single event. These data represent a wake-up call for us to embrace that the traditional student as we once knew it and our historical way of promoting and offering and supporting our students is changing. You will notice across the top the gray bar that represents our white students, and then towards the bottom, African American students in blue, and in yellow, our Hispanic students. We also have noted that those who identify as Black has decreased a bit, or Black only, and you will notice an increase in the solid Black line towards the middle. More students are identifying as 2 or more races. Next slide, please. Similar trends are reflected in our transfer numbers. A declining white population, a pretty steady African American population, but certainly an increase in our Hispanic students. Next slide, please. The external and internal realities in our very small state in the Northeast is saturated with higher education institutions and requires our campus to be more focused and strategic in our work. As each of these indicators can reflect negatively on our enrollment, we see Southern as a place of strength in terms of what we believe we do better than any others in the region. We are intentionally diverse, as stated in our mission statement. And we must position ourselves better to take our future destiny into our own hands. Next slide, please. This work started at the top. So a little over a year ago, President Bertolino made a declaration that Southern would be the social justice institution in Connecticut. Based on our mission and the demographics, he has repeatedly and very publicly announced our desire to become a minority serving institution, or MSI, and aspirationally an HSI, or Hispanic serving institution, over the next decade. Thus, we must prepare. Building on data collected through focus groups with the various student, faculty, and stakeholder groups on campus, and data collected from the President's Commission on Social Justice Survey, we have broadened the work to include more intentional strategies to improve the current climate and prepare for the new minority majority in our recruitment, our hiring, our mentoring, and other support initiatives for employees, as well as activities for our students. He charged us, the senior leadership team, with the responsibility to develop and execute strategies that would demonstrate our efforts in more tangible ways without compromising the quality of the educational experience. This includes campus bias training and other cultural competencies trainings planned for this spring. Some of the results of this data gathering process were surprising to some, but they provided the additional motivation and impetus to move beyond the rhetoric, to begin taking steps to address well-established cultural norms that were not at all reflective of our commitment to social justice, its mission, and the President's expectations regarding intentionally positioning the campus to look more like its students now and in the future. Next slide, please. So community colleges in our area are enrolling very high numbers and very high percentages of minority students. And we see this as a very viable pipeline. Under the direct involvement of the President, the senior leadership team was charged to strengthen existing and develop new partnerships with our counterparts from our primary feeder community colleges. We see this population as the future, and for us to be engaged very broadly in opportunities within our community and those community partners for students of color and those who may be underrepresented and underprepared. Though we have a new system-wide transfer articulation program for specific disciplines, we're not satisfied that this is sufficient. Working with the leadership on the 2 community college campuses, we refined our processes that refer denied students back to the community college within their service area, and we have provided them with a, not now, but here's how you can return to Southern later. Our approach provides joint advising resources to help them remain connected and other support services. We have dedicated space, and we are trying to make sure that we provide relationship building activities for these students. I am focused on leveraging our existing analytical tools so that we can expand their usage amongst the campus community, as well as use them in our recruitment activities. The provost is focused on encouraging faculty to look for joint opportunities in scholarship, grant writing, and campus visits. We want to demystify some of what has been traditionally referred to as community college students being less than prepared, or that the faculty are less than prepared to send us their students. Our Vice President for Student Affairs began offering housing to community college students on our campus. as well as sharing ideas on how to best transition veterans, those with food insecurity, and other barriers that will make it difficult for transfer students to come to our institution. Our goal is to provide as much support as possible during this transition. These are only some of the efforts that we recognize will be important as we prepare for the changing face of our student population. Next slide, please. Having an MSI vision put before us, grounded in our new reality that provided us focused and a goal that we are trying to achieve. Examining the data, whether from the climate survey or our achievement gaps by race and gender, which range from 2% to almost 10%, make real challenges very much in our face. Right now is the time for us to be excited about developing and deploying strategies to move those individual needles, including targets in our enrollment plan for students of color and their successes, making sure that we are intentional about reaching out to our communities, sharing data with our partners from high schools and community colleges on our equity concerns, and collaboratively developing action items by engaging in dialogue. This has strengthened our partnership and it will strengthen our community. This is an imperative for our enrollment stabilization efforts, as well as necessary for us to live out our mission and commitment to the community. Our cherry on top for this year will be hosting the Regional Summit in the fall, where we will bring together our partners from the community colleges, school districts, government officials, business leaders, community leaders, the Department of Labor, and experts on racial issues to convene and develop an action strategy plan to support more students of color aspiring to attend and complete their bachelor's degree. The degree attainment agenda is a joint imperative to ensure the vitality of our citizens and our economy, and we see it as a collective community work. So we're excited to take on these challenges, and we are excited to take the lead in this effort. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing here at Southern. Back to you, Sally.
Thank you, Teresita. I think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of things that you've put in place and the way in which your institution is really looking to the future. Let's move now to the discussion section of our webinar. You've heard some very interesting ways in which different types of institutions in different areas of the country are looking at the shifts in demography that they will be facing. But let me start with the question for Van and Shelley at San Jacinto College. What were some of the initial challenges in your campus culture transformation?
Well, Sally, we had two really big issues to overcome. One is that we are a multi-campus district, and over time, the campuses were actually encouraged to compete with one another. And so that really made a culture based on student success difficult to achieve. We first had to really come together as one college and achieve that cultural identity before we were able to move forward in achieving student success. The other challenge we had is that there was always this attitude, and I'm sure most of the attendees can probably relate to this, is that we've always done it that way. And why do we need to change? Well, as I mentioned earlier, when our focus was on what's your enrollment count, we weren't really paying any attention to the back end. And so we may get students in the door, but we were losing them, particularly after the first semester and even more so after the second semester. And so those two kind of mental blocks really were a major impediment to us shifting our culture to one that really promoted student success and allowed us to achieve the gains that we gained over the last 7 years.
The only thing that I would add to that, Van, as he mentioned, you know, the mindset of we've always done it that way, you know, we really were trying to find those champions that really did buy into our changing culture and helping us with those folks that were kind of midway thinking about it. They were teetering on the line, and really being courageous and talking about the things that weren't working that we were spending our time on. And so this goal, as Van mentioned early on, of continuous improvement really, is something that we take very seriously. And, we have stopped doing some of those things.
Thank you. Very insightful. Quill, this is one for you. As the Community College of Aurora began this whole journey, what are the lessons that you've learned that you think might help others that are kind of where you are now?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sally. For me, one of the key lessons learned was to have, if you can, I know this is probably not possible at every institution, but to really have the campus leadership on board with all of the initiatives and really also the philosophies around equity-mindedness and inclusive excellence. And so our cabinet, which consists of 4 vice presidents and our HR director, along with the president, have all been very supportive of the work that we're doing. I report directly to the president, and we have a really strong leadership philosophy around sort of this being inclusive excellence being embedded in all that we do. And so when I'll hear from vice presidents, our vice president of administration, about suggestions of like things we can think about in terms of additional funding. And I work biweekly, or probably more than that, with our human resources director, but we hold standing meetings also with the vice presidents. And I hear in meetings that I'm not a part of, in meetings about redesigning our advising and with guided pathways, and folks are coming back to me and saying, hey, had a really great conversation about how we're thinking about equity in terms of the new advising model or in terms of the new math redesign. And so that's not possible without being able to have leadership on board, and that it wasn't always like that in the beginning, but we've had some new VPs to come in that have really understood this work, and this work was actually made a part of their job descriptions. When we have 3 new vice presidents in the last year, and so being able to really get folks in, and then they begin to hire people to CCA that are also on board with where we're going and what we're committed to. So that has been a very useful lesson, I will say, is to really influence the leadership. Our leadership has also gone through our Inclusive Excellence Champion trainings, which is more geared towards our staff. I talked a lot about our faculty trainings, but we also have training for staff, and we actually started at the leadership at the top to show folks like everyone is dedicated to this. So yeah, that's been a really great thing for us.
All right, thank you, Quill. Let me move on to University of South Florida. Paul, can you give us some specific examples, of how you all have produced an institutional culture that's really supportive of student success?
Sure, I can think of a few things, Sally, that come to mind right away. One, it's so helpful to me to have student success built into the strategic plan of the university. So it's goal number 1 of our current strategic plan, and I'm sure it will be in our next strategic plan as well, because we need that institutional commitment to serve our students. And besides having in the plan, our president constantly includes student success in her annual messages. She keeps the drumbeat going, and people understand that student success is a high priority. But perhaps in a more tangible way, our provost has made sure that everybody understands the importance of planning, performance, and accountability. So all of our units, all of our colleges, we are given targets to hit, and we're held accountable for our performance. And it makes my job a whole lot easier to know that everyone on campus understands they have a role to play, and that They're expected to reach certain targets. And so this has become a campus-wide initiative. Everybody's taking it on. And without the good work being done in colleges and departments, I think it would be difficult to achieve the results we've produced here. It's really taken everybody. And the more success we have, the better it seems to get. You know, we seem to be accelerating our progress. So I anticipate that the cultural changes we're producing will continue to drive our performance upward.
Thank you. Teresita, what's been the most challenging aspect of your initiatives at Southern Connecticut State University?
Sally, I would say one is that we are in a process of building. So there are several things that someone like Paul would talk about that have been in process for just a little longer than what we have had it. We are starting, we have a new president, he's here less than 2 years. So trying to get a firm footing and to engage our community and our constituents to trust the leadership. There's been a lot of transition at the university, so just in pulling everyone together to rally around a specific cause that's going to outpace this transition, that's going to outlast 1 or 2 people coming or going, has been challenging, but I believe we're on the right track in that regard, and it's been very participatory. So we've been very open with the campus. We've been engaging lots of different people and having lots of conversations so that we can hear and make sure that as we plan for this new minority majority that's coming to us, that we're looking at it from lots of different angles, not just enrollment, not even just about the student success. What do we do for Southern's success? Because if we do that, if we have a more inclusive climate for faculty, for staff, it's going to filter down to the students. It's going to permeate out into the community. And that word of mouth of what we are building here on the campus is one thing that we are really banking on that's going to help us to stabilize. So the most challenging part is just making sure that we bring all of these people to the table, listen to their voices, and I'll echo my colleagues, the leadership, particularly the president, just constantly beating that drum is just so important. And once he does that and we do our parts in our side jobs of all of the other things that we have to do, it's just making sure we stay on task and not letting this initiative kind of fall prey, if you will, to all of the other things that administrators have to do. At the end of the day, it really has to be about the student. What do we do to make sure that that stays focused?
Teresita, thanks for bringing up some of those issues, particularly with regard to, as Paul said also, the and others, the critical importance of stability in leadership that are consistent, or those leaders are consistent over time. I think it's also interesting that all of you talked about how critical it was to engage the full campus, which we all know is never easy to do. Stacy, do we have some questions from the audience that you'd be willing to pose?
We do. We'll stay with Teresita for a moment. Teresita, there's a question for you. Are demographic changes impacting the student enrollment leading to the white flight from your institution, or just a reflection of the decline of the Anglo population in the New Haven area?
When I look at the entire area that is primarily minority, we do not have any evidence of white flight from the campus. Everything that we are seeing, particularly among our feeder high schools, it is mirroring those demographics. We still do have majority white students on our campus, but as you walk around campus, the diversity is clearly evident amongst all the races on our campus. So we have not had any information or reason to believe that more students are not coming to us. because of our diversity and our initiatives. But in fact, that percentage reflects all of what Sally showed at the very beginning of the presentation. It's just reflective of what the Northeast, particularly in the New Haven area, has become.
Thank you. There's another question for Teresita. Is housing available at Southern Connecticut State University for community college students while still enrolled at the community college?
Yes, the initiative that the Vice President for Student Affairs engaged on is working with the community college who actually had a need. They have some very specific programs that are unique to them that they want to attract students to their institution, particularly Gateway Community College right here in New Haven. And as a result of that, we did a pilot where we said, let's work through all of the, what I'll call behind the curtains things that we have to do to make that happen. And there's actually a video that the student did talking about his experience, and he's having a great experience at Gateway while living here on our campus. Very engaged, very articulate young man. And so we were able to work through the kinks to be able to broaden that to our other partner, which is a little bit more of a ways down the road, Housatonic Community College. And they actually live here on campus and they take their classes at the community college.
Great, thank you. This question, I believe, is for all the panelists. Can you discuss how data analytics has played a role in identifying challenges to equity and inclusion?
This is Van. Before we really started seeing a change after we became involved with Achieving the Dream, we had very little data. I mean, you could ask us a question about our students and we really didn't have a good, clear picture of who they were or where they were going. And so one of the things that we've seen, and we really credit, you know, a lot of our significant gains is understanding the data better. And so we're now really looking at our student data in ways that we never thought we would 10 years ago. And so if you don't ask the right questions, you don't have the right data, you don't know where you're at or where you're going. And it's really been effective for us for a number of reasons to invest heavily in our data research and our data analysis.
This is Teresita. One of the challenges that we face is when we talked about turnover is we will have a brand new director of institutional research coming aboard within the next month. And so one of the challenges that we faced was we have data, but we were not using the data in a predictive way, and the data was not broadly shared in a way that would chart out a course for how we were going to make improvements. And so we are at the beginning stages of using our predictive analytics and looking at lots of different subpopulations that are at risk, and working very closely with our Academic Success Center so that we are providing earlier alerts and awareness so that we get students at the beginning of when signs start to appear. We will be working over the next year on more that we can do prior to the student even setting foot on campus. When they come for orientation, looking at those particular risk factors and providing them with wraparound services from the time that they hit the campus, and not waiting for them with all of those predispositions to be able to be successful. So that is something that is very exciting. That's going to take a lot of work, but the data is there. We just have to figure out better ways to use it and then close the loop by making sure that persons all across the campus have access to that data and know what to do with it.
And Sally, if I could add a little more on the question of how we use data analytics. This is Paul Dosal, USF.
Please, Paul.
We use a couple of models to help to identify students who might be struggling at any point during their time with us. So we have an in-house model that we develop using pre-enrollment data that helps us identify students who are not likely to persist into the second year. And then we also use a predictive analytics model that pulls from our student information system and learning management system, which helps us identify students in real time or using live information to help to provide support to the right student at the right time. And that support can come from a number of different people or offices, ranging from academic advisors to resident assistants.
Thank you. Quill, do you have something to add to that?
Kind of similar to some other institutions, we couldn't start this work without using data analytics in terms of actually, so in 2013 was the first time that data had actually been disaggregated, student success data in terms of completion rates and transfer rates. And then when we got into our math work with math matriculation, so we kind of had to use data. We used it as a sort of also a rationale in terms of, hey, we're not just doing this because it feels good or it's the moral right thing to do, but we have to do better and our students are not succeeding, as well as shifting that mindset around what came with that data and blaming the students. And so we had to shift that from blaming the students to taking responsibility for that. So that's the kind of only a different thing that I would add, is that we have to use it, but we also don't want to always have to use it, if that makes sense. It's nice to have the data imperative, and it is there, and we need that absolutely. And we also don't want it to be sort of bogged down by it and forget why we're doing this in the first place.
Thank you. Stacy, are there some additional questions?
Yes, this one also is for all of the panelists. How important is it to have one office or professional staff person dedicated to these types of initiatives, as opposed to having someone that is doing this work outside of their normal job duties?
This is Quill. I can answer that question because I am sort of the sole leader at my campus, and my position was created in 2015. It was very hard, from what I've been told before I got here, to keep the initiatives and sort of keep the motivation going with the equity work that had been in place with our math department, and sort of being able to do this outside. So our math department, who went through the equity scorecard, would not have been able to do this institutionally by themselves. So for me, it is extremely important, in my opinion, to have an office that's dedicated, but at the same time also communicating to the campus that this is a college-wide initiative and not necessarily only the sole responsibility of my office. And so our president and other leaders have really communicated that very well. And the council also helps with that narrative too. It is hard. I'm currently only in office of one, and I have a part-time graduate assistant. And so it is hard, and we will need to grow more staff to help sustain our initiatives. But you do have to, I do strongly believe you do need a dedicated office to help folks sort of understand what's happening with the campus and the climate, what should we do with this data, and sort of help folks along the way with implementing new initiatives. But you do also need the entire support of campus leadership, like I stated before, and the rest of the campus constituents.
Thanks. You know, Paul, you started your conversation with saying that your role has changed at your time at the University of South Florida. Does that relate to what we just heard?
Yeah, certainly, Sally. When I started out, I was vice provost for student success, and I had the responsibility for promoting or coordinating our campus-wide student success initiative, but I really didn't have the authority to carry that out. That is, I only supervised admissions, financial aid, in the registrar's office, but I had that responsibility. The provost made a significant change a couple of years ago when I was appointed vice president for student affairs and student success. and we integrated the traditional student affairs units with undergraduate studies and enrollment planning and management. So now I'm a little closer to having authority that matches the responsibility, but and I think that's helpful in response to the question. That is, I hope people at USF understand that it's my main job to direct our student success movement, but still we still promote the idea that everybody has a role to play. I can't do it on my own, although I now have a lot of that authority and responsibility.
Thanks. How about it, San Jacinto?
I would echo what my colleagues have said, but as we've been discussing, the diversity and student success here at the college, it's really infused in everything that we do, and so our values, we are grounded in those values, and so when we actually put those values on paper and shared those with everybody and built that into, we have a performance management system here. And so the values are one area that every employee at this college are measured against. And so we do have to provide, examples as an employee, but also as a leader. It's our role to then hold our employees accountable that we are always coming back to our values and making sure that everything we do are grounded in those values.
I just wanted to add that
yeah, go ahead.
Social justice on our campus is not new. What is new is a higher level of emphasis and making those espoused goals tangible. And we recognize that this is some heavy lifting and are currently having conversations about, well, who does this work and what does that structure look like? We haven't made final decisions because those are staffing challenges that we're currently facing. But I would say that we desire to have someone's job have the responsibility of continually keeping us engaged, continually challenging our thinking, and pulling all of the stakeholders around the campus together so that it does get the attention that it deserves.
Thank you. So we have sort of, I think, some consensus on how important it is to have a person who has the responsibility, even though, as Paul pointed out, sometimes not all the power that is needed to make things happen, but having someone who is really focused on keeping things moving, and that being a very major part of his or her position, sounds like a critical first step to keeping things going. Stacy, did you have another question for folks?
I do. Again, this is for all of the panelists. Are student employees, such as peer mentors and resident assistants, included in any of the trainings provided at your university?
This is Shelley from San Jacinto. We do have a student employee, so our career services department provides student employee training that does include some of the things that we've talked about.
How about it, excuse me, some of the universities, particularly South Florida and in Connecticut,
Sure.
Do the graduate assistants in any of these areas get included?
Sally, this is Paul. Our resident assistants play a big role in our persistence committee efforts. And so, for example, when we identify struggling students through our analytics platform, and we realize that the student is living on campus, we will try to reach out to the student through our resident assistants, and have discovered that intervention is powerful and much more effective than an intervention by somebody like me, for example.
At Southern, absolutely. We offer competency training, cultural competency training, my apologies, for all of our major student groups, our RAs, all of our graduate interns. there is an active role that Student Affairs plays to make sure that those students who are interacting daily with other students have this level of training. Within my area in enrollment management, we are looking for the professionals in student affairs to actually help staff in the registrar's office, financial aid, even admissions, have that same level of training and understanding so that it becomes less about something that you do, but more about how you live, how you appreciate other people, understanding your biases, understanding how to work with veterans. All of those things are our way of kind of permeating the campus, so we don't even limit it to just students, but we've learned from students that through training, we can impact our campus a lot better, and that we're all sending the same messages, using the same type of best practices and nomenclature, and we also know where to go or where to send our students for additional resources, help, or support.
Any other comments on that one? Okay, Stacy, do you have another one for us?
I do. The political climate at the moment could be a barrier to implement diversity initiatives at institutions of higher education. How have you addressed this issue?
Does anyone want to dive in on that one?
Not particularly, but I will say that we had the editor for Inside Higher Education on our campus last evening. And what he did was make sure that our faculty and staff were very well aware of what he believes is influencing things in higher education. And he separated them by what he believes are political, but his message was that there are so many other things outside of the political realm that we need to be paying attention to, that we not use the political realm as a crutch. It is real, but there are things that are happening that have been creeping over a period of time that may make it a little bit more of a challenge to actually execute. But he charged us to make sure that we understood this is good and important work for our students and for our sustainability. So we must be about this work, and we must make sure that we push to the limit that the law actually allows to ensure that we create an inclusive community for our faculty, staff, and students. And the eggshells and what you can and cannot say are things that we will have to just test to see, but we're not going to retrench on our work for our students based on the political climate.
That was a great response. Does anyone else want to follow up on that?
Yeah, this is Dan Wigington at St. Jacinta College. I'd echo those sentiments. We certainly have seen in our student body some tension with regard to the current political climate, and we've really tried to focus on what we can do for them to help them in terms of the needs they may have and promote student success and try to carry on as normal as possible. And I think to some degree that has helped. And we've had some workshops, some seminars for our students to kind of help them work through some of the questions or concerns they may have, and just kind of carry on as best we can in promoting our ultimate goal, which is student success.
Thank you. Stacy, do you have another question?
I do. How is social justice reflected in the curriculum?
Well, I'll jump in there. Particularly, since we just met, this is Teresita, we just met with our students. I've got an echo on someone, I'm sorry. With our students who are asking for a social justice curriculum. And what we found is that we actually have the courses. We need to package them and offer them differently. because they want to actually see it embedded more. They want a specific name on the curriculum. There are recommendations by our minority faculty to make some changes to things like our inquiry class, but we recognize that those classes are only for our traditional freshmen, and we have a growing population of transfer students. So we're having a lot of conversations on campus about how to embed that. What does it look like? What does it sound like? How do we make that real? If it's walking down the street, what does it look like? So, and those are challenging questions. The president has simplified many of those things to say, you know, it is complicated, but don't overly complicate it. Our goal is to make sure that when students, faculty, and staff are on this campus, regardless of their ethnic identity, their gender, how any of those things, when you come to this campus, that you are treated with civility, with dignity, with respect. We make sure that you are embraced in this community, that you are a member of something bigger than yourself. And so it's important for us to figure out, how do we do that in our day-to-day interactions? Curriculum is one part of it. Having the right organizations on campus, what happens in the classroom, how we even look at how we do aid, merit-based aid or need-based aid. So we are having lots of conversations about what the new social justice institution looks like for the 21st century, not really relying on what social justice has meant to Southern in the past.
An eloquent response. Does anyone else want to mention anything, even though this is, I think, very pertinent to what you're doing at Southern Connecticut? All right, Stacy, another question?
Yes, and this is to all the panelists. Is there a way that you can share your materials for the cultural bias trainings mentioned in this presentation?
Of course, we'd be happy to share. This is Shelley with St. Jacinto College.
Could I suggest that we could share them by having a section on the FSS website?
I'll work with Sarah and to get that posted.
Great.
This is Quill from CCA. I'm happy to also share descriptions of our curriculum as well.
Wonderful. Good. Stacy, do you have another question for folks?
I do. How important is it to have dedicated spaces on campus where underrepresented students can call their own?
Extremely important. What we know with our work and listening to our students over the last few months, they want to have their own space. They want to have a place where they can go and affiliate with persons who share certain types of characteristics that they do. That's not just for our students of color, that's for our LGBTQA students, that's for students who have affinity, we know persist better. But we encourage our students not to make that a place of where they stay. It's not a place of retreat to pull away from. It's a place to engage with other like-minded individuals. And we encourage them to go to other things that are different, explore different types of groups. There is conversation on our campus right now about the use of space for different groups. And we are getting closer, not by telling the students what we will or will not do, but by engaging in a conversation with them about how we can solve these problems, which has really turned out to be an experience for them in learning how, I will call it, the real world works, where you don't just say, this is what we want. They understand that there are trade-offs. They understand that there has to be a give and a take, and there has to be some understanding and context provided for them. So it's turned out to be a great learning exercise for them, and I'm just excited to kind of see what they do with this learning as they move and matriculate through their higher education career.
Thanks. Other thoughts on that one? All right. Stacy, how about one last question?
Sure. Do your campuses have groups such as Black faculty and staff associations that are on campus to address concerns by students, faculty, and staff? If so, how do you form those types of interest groups on campuses for professionals?
This is Shelley at College. We don't necessarily have a Black faculty and staff association, but we do have something called Men of Honor and Women of Integrity, which is an organization. It's primarily a student organization, but it's also a place for our faculty and staff to volunteer to serve as mentors with students. And there are lots of conversations that are taking place within those organizations that allow a space for that to happen with our with men of color or women of color, whether they're Hispanic or African American. But then they have that voice in that specific arena to bring up those concerns.
This is Teresita.
This is Teresita?
Yes, this is Teresita. We have a couple of things in place that we are actually challenging the groups to do more. We have a minority recruitment and retention committee. One is a subset of our AAUP that's comprised of our faculty. And we have another minority recruitment and retention group under our administrative faculty. And what we have done, or what the president has done, is engage these groups in helping us to think differently about how we prepare for the new majority minority, how we respond better to students, and to solicit their feedback as we kind of craft this strategic plan towards a more inclusive community. Out of this work, a Black coalition of faculty, and I'll use that term loosely, they are not really a recognized group, but they have come together because the Minority Recruitment and Retention Committee encompasses all of our minority groups. And the Black faculty and staff felt that there were some unique needs and things that they could offer that were not covered under our union contracts. So they have actually talked about the curriculum, because that's not a part of the charge for these other two groups. They have talked about how they can help mentor more students and work in our multicultural office, things like that. And so they weren't commissioned, they weren't tasked. They came together on their own to say, this is how we'd like to offer more and be more inclusive in our responses to our Black students, well, minority students. In the area of our Hispanic faculty, there have been recent conversations about how they can either galvanize and join with that group or become more involved in the general group. How do we not lose the uniqueness of each one of these minority groups by collapsing them all under one umbrella? So it's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds, but it is self-governed, and it shows the passion and commitment of our faculty and staff that say that we want to be a part of the solution, not that they are just complaining and saying what we need to do.
Hey, thank you very much. And I wonder if we could go to the last slide, Sarah, which I'm assuming is there. We need to wrap this up. It will be, or has been, recorded and will be archived on the FSS website. I want to thank everyone for participating, particularly our panelists. I think it was very informative. And our next webinar will be on May 23rd, and we'll get the times out. I think we're going to probably do it at the same time. But this one is going to focus on the real tough conversations on a campus regarding who owns student success. That can be the cause of some tension and sometimes inaction. So please think about joining us. We would love to have you. And again, thank you all very much. And that ends our webcast.